A group of scientists from the US and UK teaming up to create what is being called the world's first synthetic human embryos made without eggs or sperm. Some are calling it a scientific breakthrough. Others say it raises serious ethical and legal questions.
Scientists in the UK say they've created synthetic human embryos using stem cells. The structures don't have a beating heart or the beginnings of a brain, but they do include cells that would form the placenta. Scientists say it could aid research in genetic disorders. Critics say it raises serious ethical and legal questions. So they don't have a heartbeat or the beginnings of a brain. Is there an argument to be made that they aren't alive and therefore the ethical questions, they just don't apply here?
The legal limit for how long these tissues can evolve is 14 days, so they're not permitted to go beyond that. That means that it doesn't have a heartbeat yet, and it doesn't have a brain, it doesn't have cognitive capability or even impulses yet. So it's difficult to determine that it's necessarily quote unquote alive. And I think theologians and many would have an argument as to whether or not it is alive. But it still raises a tremendous number of moral, ethical, legal, and countless other issues that we kind of have to categorize in order to even try and unpack individually.
Does this mean that we are another step closer to human cloning?
The question is, what are we going to use this for? And the argument that researchers are making is that we could use this to understand things like miscarriages and developmental abnormalities and other medical issues that we would learn how to either prevent or avoid in the future. I think there's a whole other body of work which includes things like genetic editing, which this kind of runs in parallel with. And then you have all sorts of questions that the neuroscientists and neuroethicists and the bioethicists are going to want to tap into. So there's a lot to work on here before we get to a place where we can actually clone a human being.
Sounds like we definitely have a lot of legal implications to get through first before that's ever going to happen.
Yes, indeed. And I think that one of the things that this is going to sound a little strange perhaps, but for example, whose embryo is this? If it's born in a quote unquote petri dish, for lack of a better term, whose embryo is it? Is it the states? Is it the research labs? Is it the people who donated the stem cells themselves? And then what happens if we do get past that 14-day period? At what point does it move from a living thing like a plant or an animal that's not human into the developmental of moral status and human rights? That's a whole nother set of questions. So the way that the law in each individual country, and to be clear, the race is on. This research is being done in China, it's being done in Israel, it's being done in the United States, it's being done in England, and more broadly in the UK. So I think there are lots of questions that need to be answered or at least developed before we can get to any of these rational conclusions.